Have you ever stopped to wonder how a feeling, something as powerful and personal as love or attachment, actually comes to exist? I mean, is it just some abstract idea we talk about, or is it something real, something that's actually built from the ground up by our own biology? Well, today we're going to dive into a pretty amazing theory that connects our deepest emotions to the basic physics of how complex things work. Let's kick things off with a really chilling fact. After spending 25 years interviewing serial killers, Dr. Helen Morrison noticed a shocking common thread. They all had the exact same genetic marker, and every single one of them had a complete and total failure to form that fundamental human bond of attachment. Now, that isn't just some psychological fluke, it's a huge clue, pointing to something deep inside our biological hardware. And right away, that brings up a massive question, doesn't it? How on earth can something so tiny, a little glitch on a chromosome, stop something so complex and essential as an emotional bond from ever forming? It really suggests that attachment isn't something we just learn. It's something that has to be built. But how? So this shared secret among killers, it points us toward a really powerful idea. See, if a biological flaw can consistently break attachment, then attachment itself must have a physical basis. It's not just a feeling floating around in our heads. It's a real, physical system that has tangible effects on the world. Just think about it for a second. Once attachment forms, it guides our actions, right? It makes us want to be close to people, to protect the people we love. It basically acts like this high-level rule, a constraint that shapes all our smaller decisions. And that, right there, is the classic sign of what scientists call an emergent system. And it just so happens there's a model that might explain this perfectly. Okay, so let's get into this model. It's called Constraint Resonance Emergence Theory, or CRET for short. It gives us a framework for understanding how these stable, large-scale systems, like an emotion, can pop into existence from the chaotic interactions of countless tiny parts. And it breaks the whole process down into 3 distinct levels. First up, you've got the microdynamics. This is the lowest level, the real nuts and bolts of our biology. We're talking about individual neurons firing, genes getting expressed, hormones like oxytocin locking onto receptors. You can think of them as the individual musicians in a giant orchestra, each one just playing their own little part. Next, you have the mesostructure. This is that middle level where all those individual parts start to sync up and form patterns. So think of functional loops in the brain, connecting different regions, or that synchronized back and forth between a baby and their caregiver. These are like the sections of the orchestra, the strings, the brass, starting to play together in harmony. And finally, that brings us to the macro constraint. This is the top level, the beautiful, stable symphony that emerges from all that coordination. And in our case, this is the emotion of attachment itself. It's a whole that is way, way bigger than the sum of its parts. And here's the wild part. It actually reaches back down to conduct the very musicians it came from. And you can see here just how perfectly the real biology of attachment maps onto these different levels. At the micro level, you've got your genes and hormones. Then at the meso level, you have the brain circuits and the caregiver interactions that crank up that emotional resonance. And all of that comes together at the macro level to create the emergent attachment schema, a stable emotional field that shapes pretty much everything we do. So how does this system actually build itself? Well, it all starts with a process called upward amplification. In a baby, these tiny micro-level events, like a little rush of oxytocin from being held, start to line up with the caregiver being there. Then, meso-level patterns, like synchronized gazes and sounds, amplify those connections, building them into something bigger and more coordinated. But this is where the real magic happens. It's the second half of the loop, downward selection. Once that macro-level emotion of attachment stabilizes, it actually becomes a causal force. It acts like a force field that actively reinforces the tiny little states that created it in the first place. It literally biases the brain to seek out states that keep the bond going. The creation starts controlling its creators. It's incredible. So let's really look at how this resonance loop actually builds a bond. This two-way feedback, this is the engine that drives emergence. It's this dynamic dance where the parts create the whole, and then the whole turns around and organizes the parts. Now, CRET suggests there's a very specific tipping point for this to happen, and it's called the constraint resonance condition. It's the moment when the feedback between all the levels becomes self-sustaining, when the loop's gain hits one or more. You know that screeching sound a microphone makes when it's too close to a speaker? That's feedback. And once it's strong enough, the sound sustains itself. Well, at that moment, the emotion of attachment locks in. It stops being just a bunch of correlations and becomes a real independent force. And this is absolutely crucial. Once you cross this autonomy threshold, the system's behavior can be described at its own macro level. This is why a therapist can talk about a secure or an avoidant attachment style without needing to stick you in a brain scanner. That attachment style has become a real, valid level of reality all on its own. Which brings us full circle, right back to where we started, our dark mystery. What happens when this whole process of emergence goes wrong? Well, CRET gives us a powerful new lens to understand the mind of a psychopath. So in the case of the serial killers Dr. Morrison studied, that abnormality on the Y chromosome breaks the loop at the very beginning. It messes up the micro-level hardware. Because of that, the meso-level connections between the emotional parts of the brain never get strong. The upward amplification just fizzles out. And as a result, that macro-level field of attachment can never form and stabilize. So you get absolutely no downward selection to regulate behavior. This comparison just lays it all out, doesn't it? In a healthy system, the resonance loop closes, downward selection kicks in, and what you get is regulated empathetic behavior. But when emergence fails, the loop never closes. It's all just bottom-up information flow, and you're left with an emotionally unregulated person whose behavior is purely micro-driven, impulsive, predatory, and totally lacking in empathy.
But, this theory does so much more than just explain psychopathy. It really opens up entirely new ways of thinking about our inner lives and, frankly, what it even means to be human.
I mean, the implications here are huge. We could potentially start classifying mental health disorders based on which specific resonance loops are failing to close. We can start to see other complex human traits, like empathy or maybe even morality, as similar emergent systems. And this is wild. It could even provide a blueprint for creating artificial intelligence that might one day be able to form genuine attachment-like bonds. And yet this isn't just some cool-sounding philosophy. CRET makes concrete, testable predictions. For example, it predicts there's a measurable threshold of caregiver-infant synchrony in things like heart rate or gaze that's needed for attachment to lock in. It also predicts how trauma, like neglect, can literally shatter that macro-level attachment bond, even if all the underlying brain circuits are perfectly fine. These aren't just abstract ideas. These are hypotheses we can go out and test in the real world. So in the end, what CRET is really telling us is that our emotions aren't some mysterious ghost in the machine. They're a whole new level of reality, born from a symphony of biology. It's that incredible moment when all the scattered notes of our neurons resonate together. And through that resonance, something entirely new and powerful, an emotion, a bond, a self, just clicks into being.